What would you do if a small act of kindness changed your life forever? When an 11-year-old boy stands up for a stranger on a bus, he never expects the arrival of a sleek Rolls-Royce at his doorstep the next morning, or the shocking secrets it brings. A story of courage, connection, and life-changing choices you won't believe. Watch until the end to uncover the truth. And hey, share with me where you're watching this video from. I'd love to know. The morning light filtered softly through the thin curtains of the Hayes' modest duplex, painting faint golden streaks across the small living room. The muted hum of the city outside felt like a distant melody, a world apart from the quiet struggles within. Elijah Hayes sat cross-legged on the floor, his sketchbook open before him. A pencil moved deftly in his small hand, the tip creating bold lines and gentle curves as he drew yet another version of his dream home. It was not just a house, it was a sanctuary. Each window, each door, every inch of the design was a reflection of what Elijah imagined safety and love could be. Nearby, Isaac Hayes stood at the kitchen counter, patching up a frayed toolbox with duct tape. His worn hands, calloused from years of carpentry and odd jobs, moved methodically as he worked. Though his frame was tired, there was an undeniable strength in his stance, a resilience that had carried him through every hardship since the loss of his wife, Leah, 4 years ago. "You're up early again," Isaac said, glancing toward his son with a faint smile. "That house must be important if it's keeping you from sleeping in." Elijah looked up, his face lighting up with the enthusiasm only an 11-year-old could muster. "It's not just a house, Dad. It's our future. See here? This is your workshop in the backyard. No more borrowing tools or working in the rain." Isaac chuckled, though the sound carried a note of melancholy. "You've thought of everything, haven't you?" He walked over to Elijah, crouching down to examine the drawing. "You've even got a garden." "Mom said gardens are good for the soul," Elijah replied softly, his voice dropping as the memory of Leah surfaced between them. There was a pause, a moment heavy with the unspoken. Isaac ruffled Elijah's hair and stood, shifting the focus back to the present. "Well, if I'm going to make that workshop a reality, I need to ace this job interview today." His words were confident, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. "You'll get it," Elijah said with quiet conviction. "You always try your best." Isaac smiled, though he couldn't bring himself to respond. Instead, he turned to the stove where a single egg sizzled in a small, battered frying pan. He split it between 2 plates, adding a slice of toast to each, and placed one plate in front of Elijah. "Eat up, buddy. Big day ahead," Isaac said, his tone attempting lightness. Breakfast was quiet, punctuated only by the clink of forks and the occasional shuffle of Isaac's shoes as he paced, going over his mental checklist for the interview. In his mind, doubts swirled. Was he enough? Could he provide the life his son deserved? "Dad," Elijah said suddenly, pulling Isaac out of his thoughts. "It's going to be okay. You always tell me that kindness brings good things back. Maybe today is one of those days." Isaac paused, looking at his son, his heart swelling with pride and gratitude. "Maybe you're right," he said, his voice soft. After breakfast, Elijah shouldered his backpack, the straps worn and mended more times than Isaac could count. Isaac handed him a brown paper bag containing a sandwich and a few crackers, humble but packed with care. "Remember, get off at your usual stop, okay?" "I got it, Dad. I'm not a little kid anymore," Elijah replied, grinning. "You'll always be my little kid," Isaac said, his voice thick with affection. He crouched down to Elijah's eye level, placing a firm but gentle hand on his shoulder. "And don't forget what I always say. Kindness is the one thing you can always afford to give," Elijah finished, rolling his eyes playfully. "You say it all the time." "Because it's true," Isaac replied, his smile widening. The school bus rumbled to a halt outside, its brakes hissing. Isaac walked Elijah to the door and helped him climb aboard. As the bus pulled away, Elijah waved through the window. Isaac stood on the curb watching until the bus turned the corner and disappeared. The ache of separation, small but sharp, settled in his chest. He sighed, adjusted the strap of his patched-up tool bag, and began the walk to his interview. Inside the bus, Elijah settled into a seat by the window. The cityscape blurred past him in streaks of gray and gold as he pressed his sketchbook tightly against his chest. His father's words lingered in his mind, a mantra he held close. Elijah knew the world wasn't always fair, but he believed in the power of small acts to create big changes. As the bus rattled toward its next stop, Elijah opened his sketchbook, flipping to a blank page. He began drawing again, the familiar rhythm of pencil against paper soothing his nerves. He didn't know what the day would bring, for himself or for his father, but he felt an unshakable certainty. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The bus rattled along the uneven streets, each jolt making Elijah grip his sketchbook tighter. His father's words still echoed in his mind. Kindness is the one thing you can always afford to give. He replayed them like a mantra, letting their rhythm steady his thoughts. Outside, the morning wore a palette of muted grays, the city awakening sluggishly under a heavy sky. Elijah turned his gaze to the buildings blurring past, their facades faded, worn by years of wind and rain, much like the people who hurried through the streets below. Life didn't always seem fair, but it was moments like these, when the world felt too heavy, that he clung to his father's wisdom. The bus lurched to a stop, its doors opening with a mechanical groan. Elijah glanced up as a woman boarded, her movements hurried, almost frantic. She looked to be in her late 30s, her dark hair loosely tied back, strands escaping around her face. Her coat was 2 sizes too big, fraying at the edges, and her shoes, once white, were scuffed beyond repair. She clutched a worn canvas bag tightly to her chest, her knuckles pale with strain. "Good morning, ma'am." The driver, a burly man with a thick southern drawl, greeted her. His tone was flat, devoid of warmth. The woman hesitated, her eyes darting between him and the few passengers scattered throughout the bus. I don't have the fare right now," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I need to get to. It's really important. I promise I'll pay later." The driver's expression darkened. He folded his arms and leaned back against the driver's seat, his posture radiating disdain. "Lady, this ain't a charity," he said, his voice loud enough to draw the attention of the passengers. "You can't pay, you don't ride. I just need—" she began, but her words faltered as tears welled in her eyes. The humiliation was palpable, her shoulders hunching as though she could shrink under the weight of the stairs. The other passengers either looked away, their faces carefully neutral, or whispered to one another, their expressions betraying quiet judgment. No one moved to help. The silence was deafening, a collective refusal to intervene. Elijah felt his heart race, his grip on the edge of his seat tightening. His father's words echoed louder now, almost drowning out his own doubts. He glanced down at his pocket where his lunch money, a crumpled dollar bill and a handful of coins, rested. It wasn't much, but it was enough. "Here," Elijah said, standing suddenly. His voice wavered, but he stepped into the aisle, holding out the money. "This should cover her fare." All eyes turned to him, the small figure standing alone in the middle of the bus. The driver blinked, clearly taken aback, before scowling. "Kid, what are you doing?" he barked. "This ain't your problem." Elijah straightened his shoulders, his hands trembling but firm as they held out the money. "She needs help," he said simply, "and you can't just leave her here." The driver hesitated, his gaze shifting from Elijah to the woman, who now looked at the boy with wide, tear-filled eyes. Finally, with an exaggerated huff, the driver snatched the money from Elijah's hand. "Fine," he muttered. "She's your problem now." The woman quickly took a seat, her canvas bag still clutched tightly to her chest. Her tears flowed freely now, but they were no longer tears of humiliation. They were tears of gratitude. She turned to Elijah, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Thank you. I don't know how to repay you." Elijah shrugged, his cheeks flushing under her gaze. "It's okay," he said. "Everyone needs help sometimes." The other passengers remained silent, though their expressions had shifted. Some looked ashamed, their eyes avoiding Elijah's. Others wore faint smiles, as though reminded of something they had forgotten. The woman, regaining some composure, pulled a small notebook from her bag and scribbled something inside. She tore out the page and handed it to Elijah. "If you ever need anything," she said, her voice steadier now, "don't hesitate to find me." Elijah hesitated before tucking the note into his backpack. "I hope everything works out for you," he said softly. "It already has," she replied, a faint smile curving her lips. "Thanks to you." The bus continued its journey, the atmosphere heavier yet somehow lighter at the same time. Elijah returned to his seat, his thoughts racing. He glanced out the window, his reflection looking back at him. For the first time, he noticed something different, a quiet confidence, a flicker of something his father often spoke about, but Elijah hadn't fully understood until now. Strength. As the bus neared his school, Elijah tightened his grip on his backpack. He didn't know how, but he felt certain that the events of this morning had set something in motion, something far greater than he could yet comprehend. The weight of the note in his bag felt almost tangible, a small but significant reminder that even the smallest acts of kindness could ripple far beyond their origin. Elijah stepped off the bus, the sounds of the schoolyard flooding his senses. Laughter, shouts, the thud of a basketball bouncing on concrete. Life moved on as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Yet for Elijah, the world had shifted, if only slightly. As he walked toward the school doors, a new resolve settled in his chest. Whatever today brought, he would face it head on, just as his father always taught him. The morning air was crisp as Elijah walked toward the school gates, his patched backpack slung over one shoulder. The events of the bus ride lingered in his mind, though they felt distant now amid the usual hum of the schoolyard. Laughter echoed across the courtyard as clusters of students huddled together, sharing jokes and stories before the bell rang. Elijah blended into the crowd, his thoughts already turning to the drawing he had started that morning, tucked safely in his notebook. But just as he reached the entrance, the air shifted. A soft, commanding hum rolled through the yard, the kind of sound that turned heads without effort. Elijah froze mid-step as a sleek black Rolls-Royce glided silently through the open gates, its polished surface gleaming under the soft sunlight. The car moved with a deliberate grace, as if it belonged to another world entirely. The usual chatter of the schoolyard fell away. Students craned their necks, their eyes wide with curiosity. Whispers buzzed through the crowd. "Who's that? Is it someone famous? Look at that car!" Elijah's stomach tightened. He watched as the car came to a smooth stop directly in front of the main building. The driver, dressed impeccably in a dark suit, stepped out and opened the rear door. A woman emerged, her presence immediately commanding attention. She was tall and poised, wearing a tailored navy blazer and matching heels. Her hair was pulled back into a sleek bun, and her expression radiated authority, tempered by something softer. Curiosity, perhaps. The whispers grew louder. "She's got to be a CEO or something. Maybe she's here to donate money." Elijah felt a strange mix of apprehension and fascination as the woman spoke briefly with the driver before walking toward the school's main entrance. Her stride was purposeful but unhurried, as though every step she took was carefully considered. A few students began to follow her, their curiosity too great to ignore. Elijah stayed rooted to his spot, watching as she entered the building. For reasons he couldn't explain, his chest tightened. Something about her arrival felt connected to him, though the thought seemed absurd. Before he could dwell on it further, the school bell rang, jolting him back to the present. He hurried inside, slipping into his classroom just as his teacher began calling attendance. Yet his mind was elsewhere. Who was she? And why did her arrival feel like the start of something important? Midway through the lesson, a knock at the classroom door broke the monotony. Mr. Andrews, the school principal, stepped inside, his expression unusually serious. "Elijah Hayes," he said, scanning the room. Elijah's heart leapt into his throat as every pair of eyes turned to him. Yes, sir," he stammered, rising from his seat. "Come with me, please," Principal Andrews said, his tone giving nothing away. The whispers resumed as Elijah followed him into the hallway. His palms grew damp as they walked in silence toward the administrative offices. What had he done? Was he in trouble? His mind raced with possibilities, each one more outlandish than the last. When they reached the principal's office, Elijah's anxiety only deepened. There, seated in one of the plush chairs, was the woman from the Rolls-Royce. Up close, her features were even more striking, sharp yet kind, with piercing eyes that seemed to see straight through him. "Elijah," Principal Andrews said, gesturing toward the woman. "This is Victoria Bennett. She's here to speak with you." Elijah blinked, unsure how to respond. He hesitated, glancing between the principal and the woman. Victoria smiled warmly, her demeanor softening. "Hello, Elijah," she said, her voice smooth and steady. "I've been looking forward to meeting you." Elijah swallowed hard, his nerves tightening. "You have?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Victoria nodded, her smile unwavering. "Yes. My sister Margot told me about what happened yesterday on the bus. She couldn't stop talking about the boy who stood up for her when no one else would." Elijah's heart thudded in his chest. "Your sister?" he echoed, his voice tinged with surprise. "Yes," Victoria replied, leaning forward slightly. "Margot has been through a lot recently. Your kindness meant more to her than you can imagine." Elijah shifted uncomfortably, unsure what to say. He wasn't used to being the center of attention, especially for something he hadn't thought twice about. "I just did what my dad always says. Help people when you can." Victoria's smile deepened, a flicker of admiration lighting her eyes. "It's a simple philosophy, but one too many people overlook," she said. "You gave Margot hope when she needed it most." Before Elijah could respond, Victoria reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. She handed it to him, her gaze steady. "This is for you and your father, a small token of gratitude." Elijah stared at the envelope, his fingers brushing its edges. He hesitated before taking it, his voice faltering. "Thank you, but why go through all this trouble?" Victoria's expression softened. "Because acts of kindness deserve to be recognized, Elijah, and because I believe in paying forward the good that's been shown to me." The principal cleared his throat, signaling the end of their meeting. Victoria stood, smoothing her blazer as she prepared to leave. She paused by the door, turning back to Elijah. "One last thing," she said. "Margot gave you hope yesterday. Today you've done the same for her. Don't underestimate how powerful that is." With that, she walked out, leaving Elijah alone with his thoughts. He glanced down at the envelope in his hands, the weight of it both physical and symbolic. He didn't know what lay inside, but he could feel that his life, his father's life, was about to change in ways they couldn't yet imagine. Elijah's mind buzzed with unanswered questions as he walked home from school, the small envelope clutched tightly in his hand. He replayed his meeting with Victoria Bennett, her words lingering in his thoughts. Acts of kindness deserve to be recognized. What did that mean for him and his father? And why did it feel as though the weight of her gratitude carried something deeper? As Elijah stepped into their modest duplex, the familiar smell of sawdust and faint hints of coffee greeted him. His father, Isaac, was at the kitchen table poring over a set of tools he had borrowed from a neighbor. The deep lines on Isaac's face softened when he saw his son walk in. "Hey, kiddo," Isaac said, setting down a wrench. "How was school?" Elijah hesitated, his grip tightening on the envelope. "Something weird happened today." He placed the envelope on the table and slid it toward his father. Isaac raised an eyebrow, his curiosity piqued. "Weird? What's this?" He picked up the envelope, inspecting its plain white exterior. Carefully, he opened it, pulling out a handwritten note and a folded check. His eyes widened as he read the note aloud. "Dear Mr. Hayes, your son's kindness toward my sister Margot touched us deeply. Please accept this small gesture as a step toward a brighter future. Victoria Bennett." Isaac unfolded the check and his breath caught. The amount written was enough to pay for a year's worth of Elijah's school supplies, or perhaps even a few overdue bills. But the gesture, generous as it was, didn't sit easily with him. "This is a lot," Isaac said, his voice low. He placed the check and note back on the table, rubbing the back of his neck. "Why would someone do this? What's the catch?" Elijah looked at his father, sensing the tension in his voice. "Dad, she's Margot's sister. You remember the woman I told you about on the bus? The one I helped? Victoria said they just wanted to say thank you." Isaac leaned back in his chair, his expression guarded. "I'm not sure, Elijah. Things like this don't usually happen without strings attached." "But what if it's real?" Elijah countered. "Dad, you always say kindness comes back to us. Maybe this is it." Isaac sighed, leaning forward to rest his elbows on the table. He studied his son's earnest face and felt a pang of guilt. Elijah deserved so much more than what Isaac could provide. He had done his best to shield Elijah from the harsh realities of their financial struggles, but moments like this made those struggles unavoidable. "I don't know," Isaac admitted after a long pause. "I've worked hard to keep us afloat without relying on anyone else. Accepting something like this, it feels like giving up." Elijah's voice softened. "It's not giving up, Dad. It's letting someone help us, the same way we'd help them." Isaac was struck by the wisdom in his son's words. He thought of Leah, who had always believed in the power of community and the importance of leaning on others when times were hard. It was a lesson she had tried to teach Isaac before her illness took her, but pride and the weight of his responsibilities had kept him from embracing it fully. Before Isaac could respond, the phone rang, breaking the silence. He stood and answered it, his tone cautious. "This is Isaac Hayes." "Good evening, Mr. Hayes. This is Victoria Bennett," came the smooth professional voice on the other end. Isaac stiffened at the sound of her name. "I hope I'm not intruding, but I wanted to personally thank you for raising such a remarkable son. His actions remind us all of what it means to truly care for others." Isaac's grip on the receiver tightened. "Miss Bennett, I appreciate your gratitude, but I'm not sure how comfortable I am with this gesture." Victoria's tone remained calm, almost understanding. "I respect that, Mr. Hayes, but I assure you this isn't charity. It's a recognition of what your son has done and what he represents. I'd like to meet with you to discuss how I might help support his future, not as an obligation, but as an opportunity." Isaac hesitated, glancing at Elijah, who watched him with hopeful eyes. "I'll think about it," he finally said, "but I don't make decisions lightly." "That's all I ask," Victoria replied warmly. "Thank you for considering it." After hanging up, Isaac sat back down at the table, his thoughts tangled. Elijah remained quiet, sensing his father's inner conflict. Finally, Isaac exhaled, looking his son in the eye. "You trust her?" Isaac asked. Elijah nodded without hesitation. "She seemed honest, Dad, and she really cares about Margot." Isaac nodded slowly. "All right, I'll meet with her, but we're going to be careful about this." A faint smile broke across Elijah's face. "Thanks, Dad." Isaac reached over and ruffled Elijah's hair, his chest tightening with emotion. "You're a good kid, Elijah. You remind me of your mom more and more every day." As the evening settled in, Isaac stared at the check and note on the table, his mind racing with possibilities. The path ahead felt uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, it didn't feel insurmountable. Isaac sat at the breakfast table, the folded check still resting in the middle like a silent question. Elijah had already left for school, his face lit with quiet hope after their conversation the night before. But Isaac's mind remained tangled. Victoria Bennett's call lingered in his thoughts. Her voice had been calm and convincing, but it was hard for him to shake the instinctive wariness that came with years of surviving on his own. Was her offer genuine, or did it come with strings that weren't yet visible? When the meeting time arrived, Isaac found himself walking into a sleek downtown cafe, its polished floors and warm lighting starkly different from the cramped diners he was used to. He carried his patched leather briefcase, his hand gripping the handle tighter than usual. At a corner table sat Victoria Bennett, dressed in another impeccably tailored blazer. She rose as he approached, extending a hand with a gracious smile. "Mr. Hayes, thank you for meeting me," she said. Her tone was professional yet warm, a delicate balance Isaac couldn't help but notice. "Miss Bennett," Isaac replied, shaking her hand firmly, "I'll admit I'm curious why you've gone to so much trouble for us." Victoria gestured for him to sit. As they settled into their chairs, a waiter approached to take their orders. Isaac waved him off, his focus firmly on the woman across from him. "Your son's actions," Victoria began, folding her hands on the table, "were remarkable. In a moment when most people would have turned away, he chose to stand up for someone in need. That's not something you see often, and it speaks volumes about how he's been raised." Isaac shifted in his seat, his expression cautious. "I appreciate the sentiment, but Elijah doesn't do things expecting recognition. He just..." does what he thinks is right. And that's exactly why I'm here, Victoria said, her gaze unwavering. I want to offer Elijah a scholarship to one of the best schools in the state, full tuition, all expenses covered. Isaac blinked, the words landing with the weight of an impossible dream. For a moment he couldn't respond. His mind raced through the implications. Better teachers, better opportunities, a future he had always wanted for Elijah but couldn't provide. Yet doubt quickly followed. Why? Isaac asked, his voice edged with skepticism. Why would you do this for a boy you just met? Victoria leaned back slightly, her expression softening. Because I see potential in him. Elijah has a spark, a kindness and determination that remind me of what's possible when someone believes in you. I've spent years building my company, but success means nothing if I can't use it to make a difference. Isaac studied her carefully, searching for signs of ulterior motives. That's a generous offer, Miss Bennett, but I've always taught Elijah that nothing in life comes without hard work. I don't want him to feel like he's being handed something he hasn't earned. Victoria nodded as if she had anticipated his hesitation. I understand and I agree, hard work is essential. But this isn't about charity, Mr. Hayes. It's about providing Elijah with the tools he needs to reach his full potential. The work will still be his to do. Isaac's grip on the edge of the table loosened slightly, though his expression remained guarded. What's the catch? There is no catch, Victoria said firmly. The only thing I ask is that you consider this an investment, not just in Elijah, but in the kind of world his kindness could help create. Her words struck a chord, reminding Isaac of something Leah had once said during a late-night conversation about their future. The best way to honor the kindness we've been shown is to pass it on. Isaac exhaled deeply, his shoulders relaxing just a fraction. I'll need time to think about it. This is a big decision for both of us. Of course, Victoria said, her smile returning. Take all the time you need. I'm happy to meet again if you have any questions. As the meeting ended, Victoria handed Isaac a folder with information about the scholarship and the school. He accepted it with a nod, his thoughts already racing ahead. Walking out of the cafe, he felt the weight of possibility pressing on him. It wasn't just about the scholarship, it was about what it represented. A door had been opened, but stepping through it would mean trusting someone else with a piece of his family's future. That evening, Isaac sat down with Elijah at their small kitchen table. The folder lay between them, its contents neatly arranged. What do you think, Dad? Elijah asked, his voice quiet but hopeful. Isaac hesitated, running a hand through his hair. I think this could be a great opportunity for you, but it's not just about the school, Elijah. It's about how we stay true to who we are while taking this step forward. Elijah nodded thoughtfully. You always say kindness comes back to us. Maybe this is one of those times. Isaac's chest tightened with emotion. Maybe you're right, kiddo. Maybe it is. As they pored over the details together, a small flicker of hope began to grow in Isaac's heart. He didn't have all the answers yet, but for the first time in years, the path ahead didn't feel so lonely. The quiet of the Hayes household felt heavier that night as Isaac and Elijah continued to review the scholarship offer. It seemed too good to be true, a chance for Elijah to attend one of the best schools in the state, fully funded. Yet with opportunity came the weight of uncertainty. Isaac couldn't help but wonder if they were ready for what accepting this new chapter might bring. The next morning, Elijah headed off to school with a renewed sense of purpose, his patched backpack swinging at his side. The promise of something greater hung in the air, though he tried not to let his excitement show too much. Isaac, meanwhile, returned to his usual routine, working odd jobs around the neighborhood and patching up the lives of others with the same care he put into holding his own together. But the scholarship folder never left his thoughts. Later that afternoon, as Isaac fixed a broken fence for a neighbor, his phone buzzed in his pocket. Wiping his hands on his worn jeans, he answered cautiously, Mr. Hayes, this is Principal Turner from Crescent Preparatory Academy. The voice on the other end said, I'm reaching out to discuss Elijah's potential enrollment. Miss Bennett has already informed us of your decision to consider the scholarship. Isaac's breath hitched. Principal Turner, thank you for calling. We're still reviewing everything, but I appreciate your time. I understand, Principal Turner replied. However, I'd like to invite you and Elijah to tour the school and meet with some of our staff. It's an excellent way to see firsthand what we have to offer. Isaac hesitated, glancing at the half-finished fence in front of him. That sounds reasonable. When were you thinking? Tomorrow morning, if that works for you. Miss Bennett has generously offered to provide transportation. Isaac's grip on the phone tightened. Victoria's involvement continued to surprise him. All right, he said finally. We'll be there. The call ended, leaving Isaac with a mixture of nerves and anticipation. Could he really imagine his son thriving in a school like Crescent Prep? Would Elijah fit in with kids from vastly different backgrounds, or would the differences only deepen the divide? The next morning, a sleek black sedan arrived at their modest home, drawing curious glances from the neighbors. Victoria stepped out, her demeanor as polished as ever, and greeted them warmly. Good morning, Mr. Hayes, Elijah, she said. Are you ready? Elijah nodded eagerly, his eyes wide with excitement. Isaac, on the other hand, forced a smile, still wrestling with the feeling that they were stepping into a world far removed from their own. The drive to Crescent Prep was a stark contrast to their usual bus routes. Lush, tree-lined streets gave way to the sprawling campus, where immaculate brick buildings and manicured lawns stretched as far as the eye could see. Elijah stared out the window in awe, clutching his sketchbook tightly to his chest. When they arrived, Principal Turner greeted them at the entrance. He was a tall man with sharp features and a firm handshake, exuding authority without intimidation. Welcome to Crescent Preparatory Academy, he said. We're thrilled to have you here. The tour began with a walk through the classrooms, each equipped with state-of-the-art technology and buzzing with engaged students. Teachers greeted them warmly, some pausing to explain projects or showcase student work. Elijah's eyes lit up at the sight of the art studio, its walls covered in vibrant student creations. This is where you'd be spending a lot of time, Elijah, Principal Turner said with a smile. Our art program is one of the best in the region. Elijah's gaze lingered on a large, half-finished mural. Who painted that? He asked. One of our senior students, Turner replied. It's a collaborative project representing our community's values, kindness, perseverance, and creativity. Elijah's fingers itched to draw, and Isaac couldn't help but notice the spark in his son's expression. For the first time, the idea of Crescent Prep felt less intimidating and more like an opportunity worth pursuing. However, not everyone shared their enthusiasm. As they toured the campus, whispers trailed behind them. A group of students near the library exchanged glances, their voices low but pointed. Who are they? Do you think they're on scholarship? They don't look like they belong. Isaac's jaw tightened, his protective instincts flaring. He glanced at Elijah, who seemed oblivious to the comments, his focus still on the mural. But Isaac knew the reality they might face if Elijah joined the school. Fitting in would be as much of a challenge as excelling academically. The tour ended with a meeting in the principal's office where Victoria joined them. Turner outlined the support system available for scholarship students and emphasized the school's commitment to fostering inclusivity. We believe in investing in potential, Turner said, looking directly at Isaac. Elijah has that in abundance. As they drove home, the weight of the day settled over them. Elijah's excitement was tempered by a quiet understanding of the challenges ahead. Isaac, meanwhile, grappled with the realization that accepting this scholarship would mean stepping into the unknown, not just for Elijah, but for both of them. Do you think I'll fit in there, Dad? Elijah asked softly as they pulled into their driveway. Isaac paused before answering, his voice steady. It's not about fitting in, Elijah. It's about being yourself. If you stay true to that, everything else will fall into place. Elijah nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. Then I think I'm ready. Isaac rested a hand on his son's shoulder, pride and determination mingling in his heart. Then so am I. The decision was made. Isaac and Elijah would accept the scholarship and the opportunities it promised. For the first time in years, hope felt tangible, a delicate thread pulling them toward a better future. Yet, as the days passed, Isaac found himself unable to shake a gnawing unease. Something about Victoria Bennett's involvement, her unwavering generosity, lingered in the back of his mind like a puzzle missing its final piece. Elijah, meanwhile, was already dreaming of his first day at Crescent Preparatory Academy. Every evening he sat at the kitchen table with his sketchbook, imagining new possibilities for the life ahead. But as excited as he was, he couldn't help but notice his father's growing silence. "Dad, are you okay?" Elijah asked one night, his pencil pausing mid-sketch. Isaac forced a smile, but the weight of his thoughts was evident. "Yeah, buddy. Just thinking about everything we've got coming up. Big changes." Elijah nodded, sensing there was more his father wasn't saying. He wanted to ask, but something in Isaac's expression told him to let it go. The next morning, as Isaac loaded tools into his truck for another day of odd jobs, a sleek black car pulled up in front of their home. His stomach tightened as the tinted window rolled down, revealing Victoria's composed face. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes," she said warmly. "I hope I'm not intruding." Isaac straightened, brushing sawdust from his hands. "Not at all. What brings you by?" Victoria stepped out of the car, her heels clicking softly against the pavement. She held a manila folder in one hand. "I wanted to drop this off in person. It's the final paperwork for Elijah's enrollment. I thought it might be easier to go over it together." Isaac hesitated before nodding. "All right, let's talk inside." As they sat at the small kitchen table, Victoria spread out the documents. She explained each section with practiced ease, her professionalism impeccable. But as they neared the end, she paused, her demeanor shifting slightly. "There's something else I need to share," she began, her tone cautious. "Something that might explain why this scholarship, why helping Elijah, means so much to me." Isaac leaned back, his guard immediately rising. "What is it?" Victoria hesitated, then opened her folder and pulled out an old photograph. It showed a younger version of herself with a man who looked strikingly similar to her brother, James Bennett. Their smiles were wide, but the edges of the photo were worn, as though it had been handled many times. "This is James," Victoria said quietly. "My younger brother. He had a heart as big as Elijah's, always helping others no matter what it cost him. But kindness can be dangerous when the world takes advantage of it." Isaac studied the photo, his brow furrowing. "What happened to him?" Victoria's voice faltered, but she pressed on. "Years ago, James tried to help someone he thought was in need, a woman who claimed she was escaping a dangerous situation. But it turned out to be a setup. He was lured into a confrontation and he didn't make it." The weight of her words settled heavily in the room. Isaac's throat tightened as he imagined the loss, the betrayal. "I couldn't save him," Victoria continued, her voice trembling. "But when Margot told me about Elijah, about how he stepped in to help her without hesitation, it reminded me of James. And I realized I could do something to honor his memory. Helping Elijah isn't just about him, it's about keeping James's legacy alive." Isaac sat in silence, his mind racing. Victoria's story explained her actions, but it also unveiled a darker layer to her past, a shadow that still lingered. "That's a lot to carry," Isaac said finally, his voice soft but steady. "I'm sorry for what you've been through." Victoria nodded, her composure returning. "Thank you. But it's not about me anymore. It's about ensuring that someone like Elijah has the chance James never got." Isaac exhaled deeply, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. He could see the sincerity in Victoria's eyes, the vulnerability she had tried so hard to mask. It made her offer feel less like charity and more like a tribute, an act of healing for them both. Before she left, Victoria turned back to Isaac. "There's one more thing you should know," she said. "The woman James tried to help, she was part of a larger network. Dangerous people. I've spent years trying to ensure they don't hurt anyone else. If they knew about Elijah's act of kindness on that bus, they might see him as a threat." Isaac's chest tightened. "You're saying Elijah could be in danger?" Victoria met his gaze, her expression firm. "Not if we're careful. I've already taken steps to ensure your safety, but I thought you deserved to know." Isaac nodded slowly, his protective instincts roaring to life. "Thank you for telling me. I'll do whatever it takes to keep Elijah safe." As the black car disappeared down the street, Isaac leaned against the kitchen counter, his mind reeling. Victoria's story had added layers of complexity to their decision, but it also deepened his resolve. The shadows from her past might threaten to encroach, but Isaac would stand firm, just as Elijah had done for Margot. Isaac couldn't shake Victoria's warning as he went about his day, the shadow of potential danger lingering in his thoughts. Yet, as he prepared dinner that evening, he reminded himself to stay present. Elijah's laughter from the living room broke through his brooding, a reminder of why he would always fight to keep their little family safe. Elijah sat on the floor surrounded by crayons and his sketchbook, humming quietly as he worked on a new design for their dream home. Every now and then he glanced toward Isaac, his face glowing with contentment. The bond between them felt unshakable, even as their lives began to change in ways neither had fully anticipated. "Dinner's ready," Isaac called, placing 2 plates of spaghetti on their small table. Elijah scrambled up from his spot, his sketchbook tucked under one arm. As they ate, Elijah spoke excitedly about Crescent Prep. "Dad, their art studio has this giant wall where everyone can paint murals. Can you believe that? And the library, it's like something out of a movie." Isaac chuckled at his son's enthusiasm. "Sounds like you're already picturing yourself there." Elijah nodded vigorously. "It just feels right, like maybe I could finally show people what I'm good at." Isaac's smile softened, a pang of pride and bittersweet emotion settling in his chest. "You've always been good, Elijah. Now you'll just have more tools to prove it to yourself." After dinner, as they washed dishes side by side, the doorbell rang. Isaac's brow furrowed. Visitors were rare, especially unannounced. He motioned for Elijah to stay put and approached the door cautiously. To his surprise, it was Victoria, holding a small box wrapped in brown paper. Her usual polished demeanor was present, but her eyes held a warmth that hadn't been there before. "Good evening, Mr. Hayes," she greeted. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," Isaac replied, stepping aside to let her in. Elijah perked up from his spot at the table, his face lighting up at the sight of her. Victoria placed the box on the table and smiled at Elijah. "I brought something for you. It's a little gift, something to encourage your creativity." Elijah's eyes widened as he tore into the paper, revealing a pristine set of sketching pencils and a leather-bound notebook. He ran his fingers over the smooth surface, his excitement barely contained. "This is amazing. Thank you, Miss Bennett." "You're welcome," Victoria said, her voice gentle. "I can see how much you love to create. I just wanted to give you something to help you keep dreaming." Isaac watched the exchange with a mix of gratitude and curiosity. It wasn't often that someone outside their circle took such a genuine interest in Elijah, and it was clear that Victoria's intentions were more than just professional. As the evening unfolded, they fell into an easy rhythm. Victoria shared stories of her childhood, painting a picture of her family's struggles and triumphs. Elijah listened intently, his eyes wide with fascination, while Isaac found himself relaxing in her presence. When Elijah finally excused himself to work on his new sketchbook, Isaac turned to Victoria. "You didn't have to do that, you know. The gift." Victoria smiled faintly. "I wanted to. Elijah reminds me of someone I lost a long time ago, someone who taught me the value of kindness." Isaac's expression softened, and for a moment they sat in comfortable silence. The unspoken understanding between them grew stronger, a shared sense of purpose that seemed to fill the room. Before she left, Victoria turned to Isaac at the door. "You've done an incredible job raising him, Isaac. Elijah is proof of that." Isaac nodded, his voice quiet but firm. "I just want to give him the life he deserves." "You already have," Victoria replied. "This is just the next step." As the door closed behind her, Isaac stood for a moment, the weight of her words settling over him. In her presence, the path ahead felt a little less daunting, and for the first time, he allowed himself to hope that they weren't facing it alone. In the living room, Elijah sat with his new notebook, already lost in a new design. Isaac joined him, resting a hand on his shoulder. "How's it coming along?" he asked. Elijah grinned, holding up the notebook. "It's going to be amazing, Dad. Just wait and see." Isaac smiled, his chest swelling with pride. "I believe you, buddy. The bond between them felt stronger than ever, fortified not just by love but by the growing support of someone who had become more than a benefactor. Victoria's presence was beginning to feel like an integral part of their story, a bridge between their past struggles and the future they were starting to believe in. Victoria's growing presence in Isaac and Elijah's lives brought not only opportunities, but also a sense of belonging they hadn't felt in years. Yet her suggestion to attend an upcoming charity gala hosted by Crescent Preparatory Academy stirred a mix of excitement and apprehension in Isaac. The event promised a chance to connect with influential figures and further solidify Elijah's place at the school. But it also meant stepping into a world far removed from their own. On the evening of the gala, Elijah fidgeted nervously with the buttons on his crisp new shirt, one Victoria had delivered earlier that week, along with a suit for Isaac. Isaac adjusted his tie in the small bathroom mirror, his reflection betraying the unease he tried to hide. They were both out of their element, but Elijah's wide-eyed anticipation kept Isaac's doubts at bay. "You ready, kiddo?" Isaac asked as he stepped into the living room. Elijah nodded, clutching his sketchbook tightly under one arm. "Do you think they'll like my drawings, Dad?" "They'll love them," Isaac said with a reassuring smile. "Just be yourself." A sleek black car arrived to pick them up, courtesy of Victoria. She greeted them warmly as they slid into the back seat, her presence as polished and confident as ever. "You both clean up nicely," she said with a smile, easing some of Isaac's tension. "Tonight's about celebrating talent and community, so just enjoy yourselves." The gala was held in the grand ballroom of a historic downtown building, its marble floors and glittering chandeliers exuding an air of elegance. Elijah's eyes widened as they entered, taking in the sight of finely dressed guests mingling over sparkling glasses and hors d'oeuvres. A string quartet played softly in the background, adding to the sophisticated ambiance. Isaac felt every bit the outsider, but Victoria's calm demeanor kept him grounded. She guided them toward a corner of the room where a series of student projects were displayed, including Elijah's sketches. His drawings, carefully mounted and labeled, caught the attention of a small group of guests. "These are impressive," one man remarked, adjusting his glasses as he examined Elijah's work. "Who's the artist?" Elijah stepped forward, his voice quiet but steady. "I am, sir." The man turned, his face lighting up with genuine admiration. "Well done, young man. You've got a bright future ahead of you." Elijah beamed, and Isaac felt a swell of pride watching his son hold his own in such an intimidating setting. But just as he began to relax, his attention was drawn to a figure standing near the bar, a man in a dark suit, his posture rigid, his gaze fixed on Victoria. Isaac's stomach tightened. The man's presence reminded him of the shadow Victoria had warned him about. He leaned toward her, keeping his voice low. "Do you know that guy?" he asked, nodding subtly in the man's direction. Victoria's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but she quickly composed herself. "I do," she said quietly. "He's one of them." Isaac's pulse quickened. "What do we do?" Victoria met his gaze, her expression firm. "Stay calm. This is a public space. They won't try anything here. But I need to handle this." Before Isaac could protest, Victoria excused herself and crossed the room toward the man. Her movements were measured, her confidence unwavering. Isaac watched as she engaged him in a quiet, tense conversation, her body language both assertive and cautious. Meanwhile, Elijah continued to share his work with curious guests, oblivious to the undercurrent of tension. Isaac kept one eye on his son and the other on Victoria, his protective instincts on high alert. As the evening wore on, Victoria returned, her expression strained but composed. She leaned close to Isaac and spoke in a low voice. "They're watching, but they won't act tonight," she said. "We need to be careful moving forward. I'll explain everything later." Isaac nodded, his jaw tightening. He wanted to press her for more information, but the weight of her words kept him silent. For now, all he could do was trust her judgment. Despite the encounter, the gala ended on a high note for Elijah. His sketches garnered praise from several influential guests, and Principal Turner personally congratulated him on his talent. As they prepared to leave, Victoria pulled Elijah aside. "You did wonderfully tonight, Elijah," she said with a warm smile. "Your work inspired a lot of people." Thanks, Miss Bennet, Elijah replied, his face glowing with pride. I just drew what I love. And that's what makes it special, Victoria said. Never stop doing that. On the ride home, Elijah chattered excitedly about the compliments he'd received and the new ideas he wanted to try. Isaac listened, his heart swelling with pride but shadowed by concern. The evening had shown them a glimpse of the life they could have, but it had also confirmed that the dangers Victoria had warned about were very real. As the car pulled up to their house, Isaac glanced at Victoria. Thank you, he said quietly, for everything, but we need to talk soon. Victoria nodded, her expression serious. I agree. Let's plan for tomorrow. That night, as Elijah sketched furiously at the kitchen table, Isaac sat by the window, watching the street for any sign of trouble. The path they were on felt both promising and precarious, and he resolved to stay vigilant, no matter what lay ahead. The morning after the gala began quietly, but a tension lingered in the Hayes household. Isaac couldn't shake the unease from the previous night. The man at the bar, Victoria's quiet warning. The more he thought about it, the more he realized they needed answers. Elijah, unaware of his father's growing concerns, was still riding the wave of excitement from the gala. He eagerly showed Isaac his newest sketches, inspired by the compliments he had received. Look at this one, Dad, Elijah said, holding up a detailed drawing of a sprawling community center. It's a place where everyone can come together. Art, games, classes. What do you think? Isaac forced a smile, his voice soft. It's incredible, buddy. You've got a real gift. Elijah beamed, but Isaac's mind was elsewhere. He glanced at the clock. Victoria was due to arrive shortly for a meeting, and Isaac planned to confront her about the man at the gala and the lingering threat she seemed hesitant to fully disclose. When Victoria's car pulled up, Isaac opened the door before she could knock. She entered, her face composed but her eyes clouded with concern. Good morning, Isaac, she said. We need to talk. That makes two of us, Isaac replied, closing the door behind her. He motioned for her to sit at the kitchen table while Elijah busied himself in his room. Who was that man last night, and how much danger are we really in? Victoria sighed, her usual calm faltering slightly. His name is Daniel Cross. He's connected to the people who targeted my brother years ago. They've been watching me ever since, trying to exploit any vulnerability they can find. Last night was a reminder that they haven't forgotten. Isaac leaned forward, his jaw tightening. And what about Elijah? You said they might see him as a threat because of what he did for Margot. Are they watching him too? Victoria hesitated before nodding. It's possible, but I've taken steps to ensure your safety. Security measures, surveillance. I won't let anything happen to either of you. Isaac's fists clenched. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I can't protect my son if I don't know what we're up against. I wanted to handle it myself, Victoria admitted, her voice steady but tinged with regret. But you're right. You deserve to know. And now that they've made their presence known, we need to be proactive. Their conversation was interrupted by a loud knock at the door. Isaac's stomach dropped. He exchanged a wary glance with Victoria before stepping cautiously toward the door. Peering through the peephole, he saw a man in a dark suit, one he didn't recognize. Stay here, Isaac said quietly to Victoria before opening the door, just enough to see the man's face. Can I help you? Isaac asked, his tone firm. The man smiled thinly, his eyes cold. Good morning, Mr. Hayes. My name is Marcus Kane. I represent a group interested in discussing a mutual acquaintance. Isaac's chest tightened. What do you want? I'd prefer to speak inside, Marcus said, glancing past Isaac toward the interior of the house. Not happening, Isaac replied, his voice like steel. Say what you need to say and leave. Marcus's smile faded, his demeanor turning icy. You're in no position to make demands, Mr. Hayes. We know about your son. We know about Miss Bennet. And we know the choices you've made recently. Let's just say, we don't take kindly to interference. Isaac's heart pounded, but he stood his ground. Get off my property before I call the police. Marcus's gaze lingered for a moment, a silent warning in his eyes, before he turned and walked away. Isaac watched as he climbed into a black car parked down the street, its engine purring to life before disappearing around the corner. Closing the door, Isaac leaned against it, his mind racing. Victoria stood nearby, her expression grim. "That was a warning," she said softly. "They're trying to intimidate you." "Well, it worked," Isaac replied, his voice tight. "I'm not just worried about Elijah anymore. I'm worried about what these people will do to keep us quiet." Victoria stepped closer, her voice steady. "We won't let them win, but we need to be smart about this. I'll increase security around your house and at Elijah's school, and I'll start working on a plan to expose them." Isaac met her gaze, his protective instincts roaring to life. "Whatever it takes, we're in this together." The rest of the day passed in a blur of heightened vigilance. Isaac kept a close eye on Elijah, who seemed oblivious to the tension. But as night fell, the weight of their situation pressed down on him. The shadows of danger were no longer distant. They were at their doorstep. Sitting by the window, Isaac watched the quiet street, his resolve hardening. He didn't know how long this fight would last, but he knew one thing for certain. He would protect his son, no matter the cost. The tension in the Hayes household had reached its peak. Isaac barely slept, spending most nights stationed by the window, watching for any sign of trouble. Victoria's team had ramped up security around the house and Elijah's school, but the unease lingered. Despite the danger, Isaac and Victoria both knew they couldn't let fear control their actions. The time had come to act. One morning, as Isaac sipped his coffee at the kitchen table, Victoria arrived with news. She held a slim file in her hand, her expression a mix of determination and urgency. "We have a lead," she said as she sat across from him. "My investigators found a connection between Marcus Kane and several shell companies tied to Crescent's recent donations. They've been using the gala as a cover for laundering money." Isaac frowned, his mind racing. "So this isn't just about you or Elijah, it's bigger than that." Victoria nodded. "Much bigger. But exposing them will take more than evidence. We need witnesses. I'm willing to testify, but I think they're counting on you and Elijah staying silent." Isaac's protective instincts flared. "You're asking me to put my son in the middle of this?" "No," Victoria said firmly. "I'm asking you to trust me. We'll keep Elijah safe. But your voice matters, Isaac. You've seen their tactics firsthand, and that makes you a crucial part of this fight." Isaac leaned back in his chair, his gaze drifting to the living room where Elijah sat engrossed in his sketchbook. The idea of risking his son's safety was unthinkable, but the alternative, letting these people continue their schemes unchecked, was equally unbearable. "All right," he said finally, "but we do this on our terms. No risks to Elijah." Victoria placed a hand on his arm, her touch steady and reassuring. "Agreed. We'll make this as secure as possible." The next week was a whirlwind of preparation. Victoria's legal team worked tirelessly to compile evidence, while Isaac and Victoria rehearsed their statements. Elijah, sensing the seriousness of the situation, kept himself busy with schoolwork and art, though he occasionally shot his father questioning looks. On the day of the deposition, Isaac's nerves were frayed, but he kept a calm exterior for Elijah's sake. Victoria accompanied him to the courthouse, her presence a steadying force. "You're doing the right thing," she said quietly as they waited outside the chamber. "This could change everything, not just for us, but for everyone they've hurt." Isaac nodded, his resolve firm. "Let's finish this." Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Marcus Kane's cold, calculating gaze met Isaac's as he entered the room, but Isaac didn't falter. He recounted everything: Marcus's veiled threats, the man's presence at the gala, and Victoria's warning about the network targeting her. Victoria followed with her own testimony, detailing her brother's tragic fate and the years she'd spent piecing together the truth. The legal team presented their findings: financial records, anonymous testimonies, and connections tying Marcus and his associates to the criminal network. By the time they finished, the room buzzed with energy. The judge, a stern woman with a piercing gaze, reviewed the evidence carefully before addressing them. "You've presented a compelling case," she said. "Rest assured, we'll pursue this matter with the full weight of the law." Relief washed over Isaac, but it was short-lived. As they left the courthouse, he noticed a black car idling nearby, its driver's gaze fixed on them. Victoria's security detail moved in quickly, creating a barrier as they escorted Isaac and Victoria to safety. Back at the Hayes home, the tension remained thick. Elijah greeted them at the door, his expression a mix of curiosity and concern. "Did it go okay, Dad?" he asked. Isaac knelt to meet his son's eyes, his voice steady. "It went as well as it could, buddy. We did what we had to do." Elijah nodded, sensing his father's exhaustion. "You're brave, Dad, just like you always say I am." Isaac's chest tightened with emotion. He ruffled Elijah's hair, a small smile breaking through his tired expression. "I learned it from you, kiddo." That evening, Victoria joined them for dinner. The tension had eased slightly, replaced by a cautious optimism. As they ate, Elijah shared his latest drawings, his enthusiasm infectious. "You've got real talent, Elijah," Victoria said warmly. "I can't wait to see what you create next." Isaac watched the exchange, his heart swelling with gratitude. Despite the dangers they faced, they had found something worth fighting for: trust, connection, and the promise of a brighter future. As the night wore on, Isaac and Victoria talked quietly on the porch, the cool breeze carrying the scent of autumn leaves. "Thank you," Isaac said, his voice low but sincere, "for believing in us, for standing by us." Victoria's gaze softened. "You and Elijah have done the same for me. I haven't felt this hopeful in a long time." They sat in comfortable silence, the weight of the day finally lifting. For the first time, the shadows of the past seemed less daunting, and the path ahead felt illuminated by a shared determination to face whatever came next, together. The courthouse doors closed behind Isaac and Victoria with a resounding thud, signaling the end of a long, grueling battle. The testimony, evidence, and sheer determination had pushed Marcus Kane and his network into a corner. Charges were officially filed, and the first steps toward dismantling the criminal operation were underway. Isaac felt a weight lift, but it was tempered by the lingering knowledge that vigilance was still necessary. Back home, Elijah waited eagerly by the window, his sketchbook forgotten on the coffee table. When the familiar sound of his father's truck echoed down the street, he bolted to the door, throwing it open before Isaac even reached the steps. "How did it go, Dad?" Elijah asked, his wide eyes searching Isaac's face. Isaac knelt to meet his son's gaze, his hand resting on Elijah's shoulder. "We did it, buddy. The people who've been causing trouble, they're going to face justice." Elijah's face lit up, and he threw his arms around Isaac. "I knew you could do it." From the truck, Victoria stepped out, a tired but victorious smile on her face. She walked up to the porch, her gaze softening as she watched the father and son embrace. "You're both incredible," she said. "This wouldn't have been possible without you, Isaac." Isaac stood, nodding toward Victoria. "This was a team effort, and it's not over yet." Inside the house, the mood was lighter than it had been in weeks. Elijah pulled Victoria into the living room to show her his latest sketches, and Isaac brewed coffee, savoring the small moment of peace. For the first time, their home felt less like a fortress and more like a place where hope could thrive. The following week saw progress on many fronts. News of the legal case spread, and Victoria's courageous testimony gained widespread recognition. Crescent Preparatory Academy publicly distanced itself from those implicated, reinforcing its commitment to integrity. Elijah's scholarship was secure, and his sketches were chosen for a feature in the school's upcoming art showcase, a first for a new student. One crisp autumn afternoon, Victoria invited Isaac and Elijah to a celebratory dinner at her estate. It was a stark contrast to the gala's grandeur, instead marked by warmth and familiarity. The trio shared stories, laughter, and a palpable sense of relief as the shadows of danger slowly receded. "Elijah," Victoria said as dessert was served, "I heard about the art showcase. I'll be there to cheer you on." Elijah's cheeks flushed with pride. "Thanks, Miss Bennett. I've been working on something special for it." Isaac, watching his son thrive, felt a quiet gratitude for everything they'd endured and overcome. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had forged connections and lessons he wouldn't trade for anything. Later that evening, Victoria and Isaac found themselves on the porch, the golden hues of the setting sun casting long shadows across the lawn. "You've given Elijah so much," Isaac said, his voice low. And not just opportunities, stability, hope. I don't know how to thank you. Victoria's gaze met his, her eyes soft but steady. You don't need to thank me. You and Elijah have reminded me why it's worth fighting for what matters. You've given me something too, a family I never thought I'd have. For a moment, the weight of unspoken feelings hung between them, the bond they'd formed now undeniable. But there was no need for words. The silence was enough, a shared understanding of everything they had endured together. The art showcase arrived quickly, bringing with it a mix of excitement and nerves. The halls of Crescent Prep were filled with students, parents, and faculty, all admiring the works on display. Elijah's centerpiece, a vibrant mural inspired by his dream home, stood out, drawing praise from everyone who passed by. As Victoria and Isaac stood by his side, watching Elijah proudly explain his work to a group of curious onlookers, Isaac felt a profound sense of accomplishment. Despite everything, they had built something extraordinary, a foundation for a brighter future. That night, as they drove home, Elijah leaned back in his seat, his sketchbook on his lap and a contented smile on his face. Dad, do you think I can really make places like that someday? Isaac reached over, squeezing his son's hand. I don't think you can, Elijah. I know you will. Victoria, sitting in the front passenger seat, turned to glance at them, her own smile tinged with pride. The Hayes family might have started their journey in hardship, but they were stepping into a future defined by resilience, love, and unshakable trust. As the headlights illuminated the road ahead, Isaac allowed himself to fully embrace the peace that had been hard-won. Together they had faced their fears, stood for what was right, and emerged stronger. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as a team, united by the triumphs of their shared journey. The art showcase marked a turning point for Elijah and Isaac. The applause and admiration Elijah received were not just affirmations of his talent, but validations of their hard work, perseverance, and unwavering belief in one another. As the weeks passed, life settled into a more stable rhythm. Victoria's ongoing legal battle against Marcus Kane and his network continued to gain momentum, keeping her in the public eye. Yet she still made time to visit the Hayes family, her bond with them growing stronger. Elijah's sketches began evolving into more complex designs. His dream house was no longer just a place in his imagination, but a vision he wanted to bring to life. Every evening he sat at the kitchen table, his pencils flying across the page, adding details to the garden, the workshop, and the welcoming front porch. Dad, do you think we could actually build this one day? Elijah asked one evening, his eyes alight with hope. Isaac looked over his son's shoulder, admiring the intricate details of the drawing. The house Elijah had designed was modest yet beautiful, a perfect reflection of the boy's heart. I think we can, Isaac said. It might take time, but if there's one thing I've learned from you, it's that anything's possible if you put your mind to it. The words were more than encouragement. They were a promise. Isaac began to consider how he could turn Elijah's dream into reality. He started picking up extra shifts, saving every penny he could. Though the idea seemed daunting, Isaac's determination never wavered. Meanwhile, Victoria had her own plans in motion. During one of her visits, she placed a set of blueprints on the kitchen table. Elijah, she said, I had these drawn up based on your designs. I thought you might like to see what they'd look like as actual plans. Elijah's jaw dropped as he carefully unfolded the blueprints. Each detail from his sketches had been rendered into precise architectural drawings. This is amazing, he exclaimed, his fingers tracing the lines. How did you do this? I know a few people in the field, Victoria said with a smile, but these are just the beginning. If you're serious about building this, I'd like to help. Isaac looked at her, his brows furrowing. Victoria, you've already done so much for us. We can't ask you to. You're not asking, Victoria interrupted gently. This isn't about charity, Isaac. It's about creating something meaningful, together. Isaac hesitated, but Elijah's excitement was contagious. The boy was already talking about where the workshop would go and how the swing set should be positioned under the largest tree. Over the next few months, the project became a family effort. Isaac and Victoria worked tirelessly to secure permits, gather materials, and enlist help from local volunteers. Elijah, meanwhile, took on the role of project coordinator, overseeing the layout and making adjustments to the plans as they went. The first day of construction was a mix of excitement and exhaustion. Neighbors came to lend a hand, their support a testament to the impact Isaac and Elijah had on the community. Isaac worked from dawn until dusk, his hands blistered but his heart full. Watching Elijah run between workers, his clipboard in hand, filled him with a pride he couldn't put into words. Victoria was there every step of the way, trading her usual tailored suits for jeans and work gloves. She joked with the volunteers, hauled lumber, and ensured everyone had enough to eat and drink. Her presence wasn't just practical, it was a source of inspiration. As the days turned into weeks, the house began to take shape. Walls went up, windows were installed, and the garden Elijah had envisioned started to bloom under the care of dedicated hands. Every evening, the trio sat on the site's makeshift porch, marveling at how much they had accomplished together. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Elijah climbed up onto the partially finished roof to watch the sunset. Isaac and Victoria followed, carefully navigating the beams. "Look at this," Elijah said, his voice filled with wonder. "It's even better than I imagined." Isaac placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "That's because it's real now. You made this happen, Elijah." Victoria smiled, her gaze shifting between the house and the two people who had become her family. "This isn't just a house," she said softly. "It's a symbol of everything we've overcome." Isaac nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. "And everything we've built together." By the time the house was completed, it was more than just a structure. It was a testament to resilience, kindness, and the unbreakable bonds they had forged. The workshop was filled with tools Isaac had saved for. The garden flourished under Elijah's care, and the front porch became a gathering place for neighbors and friends. The day they moved in, Elijah stood in the doorway, his sketchbook in hand. "We did it," he said, his voice filled with awe. Isaac wrapped an arm around his son's shoulders, his voice steady. "Yeah, buddy, we did." Victoria stood behind them, her heart swelling with pride. For the first time in years, she felt not just accomplished, but whole. Together, they had turned a dream into a reality, one that would stand as a beacon of hope for years to come.